All right, let's take time to listen to what God would like to say to us this morning. If you take your Bibles and open up to Proverbs chapter 22. It says in Matthew 19:13-14, "Then some children were brought to Jesus so that he might lay his hands on them and pray. And the disciples rebuked them. But Jesus said, 'Let the children alone and do not hinder them from coming to me, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these.'" What's your reaction when I say the word children? Children. Some view children as obstacles that get in the way of what you are trying to do. Some view them as irritations that ruin peace of mind. Some view them as obligations that you just have to put up with, and it spends up all your energy and you're exhausted. But how does Jesus here view children? The King of Kings and Lord of Lords says children are precious and valuable and welcome. That's how God views them. And yes, children create obstacles and irritations and drain us of energy, but we need to make sure that above all the things that how we view children, we have his view that they're precious and valuable and welcome. We've been talking about goals this month, goals for the new year, and asking, what goals does God want us setting? Does he want us to be like a leaf that just kind of blows around in the wind? No, God says, I want you living your life on purpose, setting goals. And we looked at the first goal of the new year, which was, what is your goal for God? What is your goal for you and God? A lot of people haven't thought that through, but God makes it clear in the Bible that one of the main goals that he wants us to set with him is to seek him, to seek God. And I've been encouraging you, set that as a goal for your days, that I'm going to sit down right now. God, help me to seek and find you as I go to the word and to prayer. A second goal that we looked at last week was, what is your goal for your spouse? Do you have a goal for your spouse, or are you just kind of shooting past each other on a daily basis to getting the next thing done? God says, no, I want you setting goals for your spouse, and there's lots of them in the Bible, but 7 times the most repeated command that God gives to husband is to what? To love your wife. Love, 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 love your wife. And the most repeated command to wives, to respect, to yield to your husband's leadership in the home. God repeats that 4 times to wives. These are goals that God says, I want you to keep these for your spouse. It'll make your lives go better, and it'll bring honor and glory to me. Now, we're kind of working through the families here, and I thought today we need to look at, what does God say to do with your children? What is your goal for your children that are in your life? Have you ever thought about that? Now, if you're a parent, I'm sure you have thought about that. But what if you're not a parent at the moment? Does that mean you're off the hook? I don't believe so. You may be a grandparent. You may be an aunt or an uncle. You may be a volunteer here at church, or you may be next door neighbor to children. All of us probably have some sort of child or children that come across our paths on a fairly regular basis. Maybe you're just walking to the park. Does God want everybody having goals for children? And I say yes. God gives us goals in the Bible for parents, but they apply to everybody who is around children. So what is the goal that God wants us to set for children? That's what we're looking at. God has clear goals he wants us to set for children, whether you're a parent or not. God says, I want you, when you come across children, to not just float around like a leaf, to do something purposeful with them. And that's what we're going to be looking at today. God's goal to set for children. And what we're going to look at first is the situation with children. What does God say is the situation with children? It's right here in front of us in Proverbs 22. Look at verse 15. Proverbs 22:15. God says, foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child. The rod of discipline will remove it far from him. So here God tells us every child's problem. And what is it? It says foolishness is in their mouths. No. In their minds? No. In their actions? No. It's much worse than that. It's deep in their heart of a child, foolishness. Now, foolishness is a word that is easy to misunderstand, used in the Bible. We talk about someone being silly, and we say, don't be a fool. We talk about someone who's maybe naive and should be a little smarter than they are, and we say, hey, don't be a fool when you're investing your money. But that's not the word use here of fool. It's completely different, the Hebrew word here in Proverbs. A fool describes a seriously dreadful person in the Bible. And you know that there are all sorts of commands in the book of Proverbs to avoid the fool. A fool in the Bible, in the book of Proverbs, is a person with a me-first attitude. I come first. I'm in charge of whatever's going on here, and don't tell me what to do. You ever know someone like that? That's the biblical fool. Proverbs talks about this. This is a person who believes all his decisions are right, and don't you dare correct me or give me advice. It's a person who is arrogant and views himself above correction. It's a self-focused attitude that creates conflict and harm in every relationship they have. And God says, avoid that person at all costs. It says in Proverbs 17, better to meet a bear robbed of her cubs than a fool in his foolishness. Imagine walking around in the woods today and you meet a bear who's going crazy because she can't find her cubs. Would you be a little concerned about meeting that bear? You should. But you should be more concerned about meeting a self-first focused person who thinks that they're in charge and that everything they do is right. God says that's a worse situation. Just where did that person start living that way? This verse says when he was a child. In fact, all of us, as children born into this world, start off the world as the biblical fool, a person who says, I come first, I'm in charge of my life, don't tell me what to do. In your insert, the situation with children, the first blank there. Each child is born with a self-first attitude. Each child is born with the fool's self-first attitude. And yes, babies are cute and cuddly, and yes, toddlers are adorable as they run around, but try telling them to go to bed when they don't want to, or to share a toy that they think is theirs. Try to not, don't touch something that they want. And you know what happens. They go crazy. You'll quickly see that they have a, look, I'm in charge of my life attitude. Don't get in the way. God says that comes built into every child. You and me. Every child we know. That comes built in. And God says, unless you change that, adults, they're going to become the adult who is, I'm in charge here. Don't tell me what to do. I know what I'm doing. Person who ruins people's lives. Many child experts today will tell us that we're supposed to let a child be free to become whatever they can. Don't restrict them. Don't put boundaries on them. Just let them flower and blossom into the beautiful person that they can be, which is the exact opposite of what God says to do. That belief is that every child is inherently good, and we just need to give them the right environment and they'll become a beautiful adult. God says no. The truth is every child is born bent on themselves first. Nobody else comes first but me. And we as adults have the command from God to train them out of that. That is what God tells us as adults. Don't put up with that. So the situation is that each child is born with a self-first attitude. And what is the solution? The solution is found in God's commandments to parents. I looked up this week all the commands in the Bible. Giant book. How many commands are given directly to parents about children? How many would you say? I would have thought hundreds. There's about 10. There's about 10 commands in the Bible directly to parents about what they're supposed to do. And so is that like 10 different topics? No. I looked and they all fall under one topic. All the commands to parents in the Bible come under one heading. And what is that heading? What is the one thing the parents are supposed to focus on in raising their kids? It's found in the first word of verse 6. Proverbs 22:6 says, train up a child in the way he should go. And even when he is old, he will not depart. Train. That's God's one overarching umbrella command that adults are supposed to do for children. Train them. Train. What does that mean? Well, we have coaches who train athletes to become, champions. We have the military trains soldiers to become warriors. Musicians train students to become world-class artists. And parents are to train their children to what? What is the training? Well, it says here in this verse, to go in the way that they should go. Train up a child in the way he should go. What's the way he should go? Well, some see here that involves the individual way that God gifts certain children. If a child is artistic, train him in art. If he's athletic, train him in sports. That's probably part of what this means. Find that bent that God has given your child, the gift God's given your child, and encourage it, push it forward. But higher than that, and much more important than that, the way that we're supposed to train our child in is God's way. Train a child to go God's way, to move toward God. That is certainly what this says here. Train them in the way they should go with God. How do you, what is that way of God? God makes it very clear. That's the summary of the way that all children should go with God. Matthew 22, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest command. To love God first is the way that we're supposed to train our children. Which way should my children go? What do I do with my child? What is the goal that God gives us in the Bible? Train your child to love God first. 3 words. Love God first. That's the summary. So in your insert, the situation is that each child is born with a self-first attitude, a love self-first attitude. And the solution is train children to love God first. Train children to love God first. Train them. Train your children, train your grandchildren. Train your nieces and your nephews. Train your neighborhood kids and the church kids and every kid that it comes into your sphere of influence. Train them to love God first. That's what God says to do. We asked what your goal is that you have with the children in your life, whether you're a parent or a next-door neighbor. This is what God would say. Your goal with children should be to train your children to love God first. Train those children that you are around, that you can influence. That's the most important thing you can do. They are naturally going to love themselves first. Train them to love God first. Now, how do you do that? How do you get that done? Exactly what are you supposed to do? Well, God gives 4 tools for training children in the Bible. 4 tools for training in the Bible. We have time to look at 2 this morning. And the first one is found in Psalm 78. Psalm 78:5 says this: God gave his law to Israel. He commanded our ancestors then to teach them to their children, so the next generation might know them, even the children not yet born, that they in turn might teach their children. So each generation can set its hope anew on God, remembering his glorious miracles and obeying his commands. So what tools is God giving here to be able to train your child to love God first? In your insert, God's first tool is your words of teaching. Just words of teaching. Just you're using your mouth to teach them about God. Words of teaching. It specifically tells in this verse what content that they were supposed to teach. Israel was supposed to teach them about God, his commands, and his great miracles. That sounds like the Sunday school curriculum of every church I've been in. Teach about God, his commands, and his miracles. But that command is not given to Sunday school teachers and leaders. The command is given to parents. The command is given to parents. Parents, be grateful for Sunday school and Bible school and Christian school. They are great tools to use, but they aren't the ones in charge of your children's understanding and knowing God. You are. And use them, but don't let them substitute you for doing what these verses are talking about. You are the one who's supposed to be teaching your children about God, his commands, and his miracles. Those are great resources, but don't let that substitute be a substitute for you doing that yourself. Parents, are you giving yourself to teaching your children about God, his commands, and his miracles? Lots of parents are very concerned about their children's math scores or about their writing ability or about their sports. So they'll hire tutors and they'll send them to athletic camps or college prep programs to get them prepared for this. But how many are equally as concerned about this task of that they know God, they know his commands, and they know about his miracles that he did? God says that's really important. It's not wrong to send your kids to, math club and to get them tutors for practical things like that. But on Judgment Day, God is not going to ask how much your kids know about baseball or about math. God's going to want to know how much do they know about me and my commands and my miracles. That's the more and much more important thing. Parents, make sure that you are taking advantage of the small window of opportunity you have of the years you get to have your children. It's shrinking every day. Make sure you are teaching them about God and his ways, his commands, and his miracles. And don't forget to include your own experiences with God. Look at this verse. Deuteronomy 4:9 says, "Be very careful never to forget what you have seen the Lord do for you. Be sure to pass them on to your children and your grandchildren. Tell them especially about the day when you stood before the Lord your God on Mount Sinai." So here is God talking to the Israelites, and he says, tell them about your own experiences. Your own experiences in particular. Remember when you were at Mount Sinai, how you saw the fire on the top of the mountain, how the earth shook because of God's presence, how God's voice boomed from that mountain that was so terrifying that you said, make him stop. Tell your children about this. And for you and me, that would be telling our children and grandchildren, the next door neighbor kids, the kids here at church, about what God has personally done for you. How he's answered prayer when you were sick, and how he helped you get a job when you were needy, how he provided for you when no one else was there for, how he changed your life. God says, I want you to not keep those things to yourself. Teach your children about the things you have experienced with God. I've heard parents say that they don't want to cram Christianity down the throats of their kids. And we have to admit, it is possible to be insensitive and overload our children with, the Bible and its teachings and God. We need to be sensitive to children about how much they can take, and not let it become a dry duty that we do, to teach them, what God is like. Remember the goal. The goal is not just to get information into them. The goal is that they love God first. So one way you'll avoid the accusation of cramming it down a child's throat is to keep it personal. To not be talking about, a historical event, but we're talking about a person who loves them, who loves the world, who is holy and majestic, who died on the cross to be able to have a love relationship with people who are unworthy of him. If you keep it a personal, loving thing, it'll go a long way to avoid the accusation that, they just cram Christianity down my throat. That's been done before, and it's turned people off because it hasn't been sensitive. Be sensitive to your child. Help them to know a loving God, a person, not just some dry facts that the Bible teaches. So the first tool that God gives us to train children, what is it? It's your words. It's your words of teaching. Teach them about what the Bible says about God, his commands, and his miracles, and teach them what you have experienced about God, his commands, and his miracles. That's a powerful thing. Parents, are you doing that? Those of you with children next door and children here in the church and children or nieces and nephews, those type of things, grandchildren. Take the time to do that. It's so important. So important. Now, the second tool that God gives us in the Bible to be able to help them, to train them out of foolishness, is found in Deuteronomy 6. It says these words, "These words which I am commanding you today shall be on your heart, and you shall teach them diligently to your sons, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, and when you walk by the way, and when you lie down, and when you rise up." All right, this takes words of teaching to a much deeper level. You can obey the words of teaching by saying, okay, we're going to have a 5-minute Bible study every morning before you go to school, and that would fulfill that command to teach your kids about God and his ways. But it wouldn't fulfill this command. This command takes that deeper. When does this verse say that we're supposed to teach our children? Today you're going to be leaving here and getting home from church and walking into your house. And if you have children, what does God command you to do as you're walking into the house? Talk about God. And then as you get into the house and you sit down, what does God say to do here? Talk about God. And as you stretch out on your bed later in the afternoon, what are you supposed to do? Talk about God. And then when you get up later after your nap, talk about God. God is saying, I want you to have an atmosphere where you soak your children in knowing about me. And you say, well, if I do that, I'm going to be talking about God all the time. And God says, exactly. That's what I want you to do. In the insert, the second tool that God gives us to train children is to use your lifestyle of loving God. Use your words of teaching. Also use your lifestyle of loving God. That is a powerful tool. How do you train kids to love God first? By you loving God first. That's what this is saying. God isn't saying you can't talk about sports or homework or, what's on television, but he's saying soak your kids in an atmosphere of loving God. The opposite is to talk about God on Sundays. Maybe pray, before the evening meal or pray before they go to bed, but that's pretty much it. That's not what God says a Christian home is supposed to be. If that describes your Christianity in your home, God says you got to change that. I want you to have an atmosphere where loving God first is always going on, and we're always talking about it in some way. Now, you can do that by writing notes to yourself. Oh, remember to talk about God, or set an alarm clock on your phone or whatever. Now it's time, we got to talk about God now. But you know that will not work. The truth is, unless we truly love God first as parents and next door neighbors and Sunday school teachers, it's not going to happen. You can't fake this. Jesus says the mouth speaks out of that which fills the heart. So if you love God first in your life, that's going to come out in your conversation at home. It's going to come out in what you watch on TV. It's going to come out in how you react to irritations. It's going to come out in how you use your free moments and how you spend your money. All that's just going to spill out because you love God first. And if you don't love God first, if there's other things that you love more than God, that's going to come out in your conversation. It's going to come out in what you watch on TV and how you spend your money and how you react to irritations and how you use your free time. You can't help it. What you love first is going to come out. And God says, parents, there's only one way to keep this command. It's you yourself love God first. It's the only way you can do this. You can't fake it. And parents, I ask you, do you love God first? How do you know if you love God's first? You're here in church this morning. That's a good start, but that's not the measure of how you know you love God first. How do you know if you love God first? Look at what fills your conversation. Look at what you watch on TV. Look at how you spend your money. Look at how you react to things that irritate. Look at how you use your free time. That will tell you if you love God first. those things will reflect what you love. And if you look at that and see it's not about God, God's really not involved in those things, you most likely do not love God first. You do not love God first, and God says you must change that. Not just for yourself, but for your children. You must do it between you and God because that's why he created you. That's the only way you can make your life work correctly. I choose to love God first. If you're looking for how to make your life work right, that's where you start. It's the first and greatest command that he's given us. And then you as a parent dedicate yourself, I will love God first. And that means you give that example to your child to break free out of I love myself first and, hey, mom and dad love God first. And I see that in how they talk and how they act and how they plan. And I want to be like them. Because you can teach with your mouth all the things about God. But if you are not behaving as a person to love God first, it's just going to be empty words of religion. Empty words of religion. They're going to follow your example before they follow your words. You can teach them with your mouth, but they're going to follow the example of your life. That means you must dedicate yourself to loving God's first to work. If you have never done this, I encourage you to get before God alone today as a parent and just say, look, I heard what you said to my heart during Pastor's sermon, and I don't love you first. There's some other things I love first. And I'm here right now, number one, to ask your forgiveness. And I'm asking you to receive me as a person who now is putting you first in my life. You come first, and loving you comes first. And I'm doing that today, and I pray that that would overflow onto my child or the children who are in my life to be able to see that and turn from their self-first love to God-first love. If you've not done that, I urge you to do that today for yourself and for the children in your life. Because saying the right things only goes so far. They will follow your example, good or bad. They will follow your example before they follow your words. So God's second tool is your lifestyle to love him. If you have nightly devotions, but you speak in a nasty way about your boss or your mother-in-law, if you demonstrate materialism and a love of money, if you demonstrate laziness and half-hearted working, your children will see and copy what you do before what you say. They will copy what you do. But on the other hand, if you are dedicated to loving God first, your children will see that and copy what you do. It doesn't guarantee that they'll become Christians, but it does give them an extra advantage in moving toward God because of your good influence. So I encourage you parents, make sure you are dedicated to loving God first and leaving the example to your children because they'll follow your examples. I came across a poem this week. It's called When You Thought I Wasn't Looking. When you thought I wasn't looking, I saw you take care of our house. I saw you take care of our house and everyone in it. And I learned that we have to take care of what we're given. When you thought I wasn't looking, I saw you feed a stray cat. And I learned that it was good to be kind to animals. When you thought I wasn't looking, I saw you make my favorite cake for me. And I learned that the little things can be special things in life. When you thought I wasn't looking, I heard you say a prayer. And I knew there was a God I could always talk to, and I learned to trust him. When you thought I wasn't looking, I saw you make a meal and take it to a friend who was sick. And I learned that we have to help those who can't take care of themselves. When you thought I wasn't looking, I saw you give of your time and money to help people who had nothing, and I learned that those who have something should give to those who don't. And when you thought I wasn't looking, I saw how you handled your responsibilities even when you didn't feel good. And I learned I need to handle my responsibilities when I don't feel good. When you thought I wasn't looking, I learned most of life lessons that I need to know to be a good and productive person. And when you thought I wasn't looking, I looked at you and thought, thanks for all the things I saw when you thought I wasn't looking. Children watch and copy what we do. They will follow our examples that we leave behind. So we must dedicate ourselves to loving God first. So our first question was, what is your goal with children? Excuse me. I don't know whether you've ever thought that through, but whether you're a parent, grandparent, uncle, or an aunt, whether you're a next door neighbor to children, a Sunday school teacher, whatever influence you have of children in your life, have you thought about what your goal is with them? Because God has a very specific goal that he wants to use you to. They are bent on moving away from God, putting themselves first instead of God. And God says, I want you to train them to love God first. Next week, we will look at 2 more ways to do this. But I want to close just by asking you about the 2 that we talked about. The first tool was words of teaching. Are you taking the opportunity to teach the children that are in your sphere of influence about God, his commands, and his miracles? You know, if you're a parent or you're around children, you have the opportunity to have them watch something on TV, put in a Christian DVD. Find a Christian cartoon. Play Christian music. Read them a Christian book. Soak their lives in the truth about God so that they come, as they're raised up, they just are raised up that, yeah, this world is about God and his ways, and he loves us, and we're here for him, and to love him first. Let them come under that understanding of that's what life is all about. Teach them that. Whatever relationship you have with children, ask God for opportunities and look for opportunities to teach them words of truth about God. And then secondly, are you using your lifestyle of loving God first, which is far more powerful? They will follow the example of your life. If you have never seriously gone before God and dedicated yourself, God, I'm going to choose to love you first every day of my life. Do that today. Do that for yourself, first of all, but also do that for the children in your life. And if you have done that, I encourage you to renew that. Go before God and say, God, before I go to bed, I'm letting you know something. I'm choosing to love you first above all things in this world. There's so many things that can take my love, and I don't want it to be anything else but you. Love you first. Children watch and copy what we do. So make sure that describes you. So whether you're a parent or a grandparent or an aunt or uncle, next door neighbor or a church volunteer, God says, I want you to have the view of children that I have, and that they are precious and valuable and welcome. Make sure that's the way you view children. They are a handful, but they're precious and they're valuable, and they need to be welcomed to your life. We have a small window of opportunity to influence the children in our lives, and it's gone. Let's make sure that we're using that opportunity to train them to love God first.